congratulations, Nina. I think it's, you make us proud.
Oh, thank you.
And one of the questions that I would rather have is, you were a little different, right? I mean, when you won the crown, showing the Bollywood dance itself set a trend, and I think Miss Missouri doing the same thing a few months back.
You have been watching your Miss America pageant.
So what do you think about it? I mean, how did you even think about doing that kind of trend when you won the title? And how do you see when this is getting carried as a tradition?
Yes. So, like I said, when I went, so I had actually grown up a classical Bharatanatyam Kuchipudi dancer. So dance had been a huge part of my life, and it really was who I was. And I think going back to what I said, I just wasn't willing to compromise that. And I said to myself, if I can lay my head on my pillow and know that I've truly represented myself, that's all that matters. And so obviously Bollywood is a little more mainstream in America than I would say a more classical form of dance. So that's why I chose to go that route. And it was, for me, I will always say that that was my winning moment. That felt like the crowning moment. And I remember on stage I had tears in my eyes after I finished performing, because that was it just opened the door for all those young little Indian girls watching, like, I knew I was watching almost 10 years ago, and for them to finally say, this year Miss America looks like me, or I don't have to have what people might think is a normal talent to be able to be in this role, which is true. And so I think what was interesting this year, I actually was invited, I was asked to be a judge for Miss America. That's when you know you're old. Like when they ask you to be a judge, you're like, oh yes, but at the same time you're like, oh, has it really been that long? And so it was such an interesting experience to be on the other end of it, because you know exactly what these young women are feeling emotion-wise. And when you have, 52 of the nation's most intelligent, talented, motivated young women, it's really hard to choose just one to represent, all of America, I suppose. But this year, Miss Missouri, who was African-American, she actually performed a Bollywood dance. And she had a fantastic interview, and I remember thinking, I was so excited to watch this, but at the same time, I was probably the only one on the judges panel who could actually critique it properly. And so for me, just watching her perform, someone who wasn't even our cultural background, but just had this love for learning about different cultures and sharing that, was just such a wonderful moment that, even her too, that she connected with this on some level and felt confident in herself to be able to share this, her own talent, and make it her own with the world. So I thought that was really special. I hope one day we will see Bharatanatyam on the Miss America stage, but I'm okay with Bollywood for now.
I really appreciate the issues that you've chosen to work on, especially cultural diversity and intercultural competence. But given the current political climate, do you find it harder? I bet you do. So how do you deal with those issues? And do you feel like people are responding more to issues of cultural diversity? Because sometimes as an Indian, as an immigrant Indian here, it feels like you're being othered a lot more, or at least it's become a lot more on surface than it was a couple of years ago.
Right.
So how do you...
Absolutely. It's certainly now more than ever, my platform is more relevant. As much as I would love to say, yes, we've done so much work, I think now is so timely that our voices are heard. And I think people are recognizing that. And I especially see it with younger generations. And that's really key, is that we're the ones who are going to mold and shape our future. And we absolutely have a voice in how we choose to portray ourselves, how we choose to use our words. Everything that you're putting out there, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, people are seeing that, and that means something. So I will always say that we are our own best advocates, and we live in a digital age where we are able to have our thoughts and opinions read and easily accessible. So we need to be able to use that. But also the other piece of it is that I don't think just simply putting out a post on Facebook is actually creating change. Yes, your opinion is out there, but also really being more proactive and taking the initiative to contact your congressmen, senators, write to them. I promise you, they really do read things. And I think that's kind of what I learned also working with, partnering, I should say, with the government, is that they really do care, and we need to also be more proactive in taking a role in that as well.
Hi, Nina. I just have a question that what would Nina that you have become today say to the Nina that received a lot of negative comments when you are?
I shake it off. I mean, I wasn't surprised by those comments, I will say, which is unfortunate. But I think it just really shed a light on how much this conversation is really needed. And even, again, like I said, more so now. So, yes, sometimes I think when you're younger, it's more difficult to shake off. But hopefully, as we see more people entering this space, and more South Asians becoming more relevant in today's society, it's really important that we use our voices together.
So with your platform in looking at the diversity, I think a question that comes up, especially for younger people, is where does the line go from inclusive and diversity to cultural appropriation? Mm-hmm. And I'm hoping you can help clarify how you see it and how you would help younger people to address it or be part of the conversation.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, and I think there certainly is a line, and we also have to educate ourselves. But at the same time, I don't think we're all experts on every single culture, so it's important to ask questions. And in order to ask questions, you also have to welcome questions as well. I don't expect everyone to be, know everything about India or my culture or background. And if I can't address what the red dot means and have an open conversation with them, I can't expect them to understand either. So I think it's a two-way street where we have to be open with our friends and our peer groups, and that's really where it starts. Especially I think in college, is to be able to open those conversations. Yes, they might be awkward. Yes, they might be difficult, but it really does start with each one of ourselves being able to.
Congratulations on all your achievements.
Thank you.
Are there any issues in India that are close to your heart, and how do you plan to use your platform to address those?
Yeah. So last year for Women's History Month, I actually partnered with the State Department, and this was 6 months in the making, I think, to get to put together this tour. But we worked with the consulates and embassies and put together a 2-week tour within India. So the State Department here actually hosts speakers to go abroad and speak on issues that are relevant to U.S. and other countries around the world. So obviously India was the one that I wanted to focus on. And so our trip consisted of really focusing on women's empowerment, STEM education specifically for women, diversity, and education of the girl child. So we were in Mumbai, Hyderabad, and Vijayawada, which is my family's hometown, which is really nice to go back to and visit. So those were the key issues that we put together, and I think I was having this conversation with someone yesterday, and although it was really wonderful to have this platform and this voice, I think kind of reflecting back from this is that ultimately I was probably reaching maybe 0.25, probably 0.025 of the percent of India's population, and the people who really needed to hear this message about education, specifically education of the girl child. We just weren't reaching those villages and communities in rural areas that we needed to get to. So I think as we walked away from it, while it was a great, it's wonderful to have conversations like this with affluent people, but how do we really target those communities was the lingering question that we still have yet to answer, I think.
So you mentioned advocacy, but do you typically get invited to speak to South Asian events, or is, because, people here are perhaps familiar with what they face or what diversity should be. But, what about the other side who actually should be hearing this message? Have you had opportunities to address, that kind of crowd?
Absolutely. So this is probably my 44th or 5th college university that I've been able to speak with. I will say that you're absolutely correct in saying that oftentimes it is a South Asian demographic. We're having the conversation with ourselves, although some colleges offer extra credit to come to my talk. So I'm like, thank you for, American white people for being here today. And they are such an important part of this conversation because we can have this within ourselves. But ultimately, again, how do we reach those people who really need to hear a part of the message? And, Miss America gave me a great platform. Social media has given me a great platform to be able to do that. But to have those one-on-one conversations, is still part of the process, I would say, on a day-to-day basis, and that's kind of the conversation that I continue or issue to sort of target right now, because I think there really is a lack of South Asian representation even in media. And I think for me personally, there's a space, we see a lot of, with Minnie Kaling, Aziz Ansari, Hassan Minhaj, there's such a space for South Asian comedians, but where is it for, I suppose, someone like me, where I don't necessarily see myself as an actress or model or a comedian, certainly, but a person who is really tackling South Asian issues, that's representing a voice for younger demographics, and that space is still void and still needs to be filled. So that's certainly what I'm working on and in process right now.
And thanks for representing us. So you talked about how to deal with ignorance towards like South Asian or Indian cultures in general, but then how do you suggest we deal with blatant racism?
It's hard. And I remember that there was a talk I was giving at a middle school in the South when it was a year after I was Miss America, actually. It was in Alabama. And I'd already given up my title, and I was working with a group of underprivileged young women. And I remember as I was walking down, there was a young girl who said, she was probably maybe 7th, 8th grade, she said, "Don't you have to be white to be Miss America?" And I was like, "Well, I can hear you. I'm not, you're like 5 feet away from me." And so I remember thinking in my mind, how do I reach that person here? Because I'm sure if she's thinking that, there's many, many others thinking the same thing. And so by the end of it, I think what you really have to do is share your experiences. It's very difficult to be vulnerable, and that's a difficult place, but it's also a very powerful place. And so to help the other person see what you're experiencing on a daily basis, I think is the best way to connect, to have them maybe think about things from your perspective. And a lot of people sometimes I think might have a difficult time with that, but it does start with each individual. We all have a story, and I think we need to share that.
Hi, Nina.
Hi.
Just a minute back, you said that the space where, like, the South Asian voice is not heard right now. Any plans to enter U.S. politics anytime soon?
It's not off the table, I will say that. I still feel like I need a little more experience to really enter that world, but of course, I've been active. I've always paid attention to kind of what's going on in our world, our nation. So it's an area that intrigues me, but not for a few years, I would say.
Were there ever points in time where you felt as though you were sort of tokenized for your South Asianness?
Oh my goodness. Yes, all the time. And I think I was having this conversation with one of my mentors, and she had said, and it really made me think, she said, there's people who are Indian and successful, and there's successful people who happen to be Indian, and you want to be the latter. And I remember kind of thinking, at what point do you use your identity and your heritage and background, and at what point do you balance, I suppose, leading with, I'm Indian and saying that, or kind of taking a step back from it too. And that's something, it's a constant balance, I think, of assimilation. But absolutely, even when I won Miss America, I felt like I was just the token brown girl. And it was incredibly daunting, actually, to feel like you have to represent the entire South Asian voice, because that's just not possible for one person. So I've certainly felt that. So I want more people to be able to enter this space so we can have more voices represented and heard.
Hi, Nina.
Oh, yes, hi.
Yeah, congratulations, and you are really making us proud.
Thank you.
Once again. Okay, so my question is, it will sound simple, but it has many aspects. So let me ask this, make it very simple. What is the biggest difference between an Indian with Miss India title versus an Indian with Miss America title?
Well, I can't say I know this for sure, but in my experience, what I've seen, I suppose, is I think Miss India is really targeted towards maybe entering Bollywood or wanting to be more of an actress model. Miss America is very much a scholarship service program, and I would say Miss USA is geared towards the acting modeling industry, and they're two separate organizations. Miss USA used to be the one that Donald Trump owned, which is now sold to WME, I think. So I've never worked with Donald Trump, just disclaimer. But a lot of people get the two organizations even here confused about what Miss America is. Miss America also has a talent portion of competition, whereas Miss USA doesn't. But reflecting on, and Miss USA is the one that goes on to compete for Miss Universe. So once you win Miss America, you're done, you don't go anywhere else. And I think the hardest part that I found for myself is that every single South Asian event that I was doing, there was always that older uncle that said, so when are we going to see you in Bollywood? And I was like, a quarter to never, is what I wanted to say. But obviously I said, well, you know, I gave him my spiel. So I think that was really hard, even for myself, is that to be viewed as almost just kind of seen as a model and a pretty face. And we have this conversation of, oh, you either can be smart or pretty, you can't be both, which is absolutely false. And it's incredibly frustrating to be viewed that way within, especially with South Asians, because I think maybe that perception of Miss India is kind of a track to Bollywood, which wasn't the route that I wanted to take.
Hi. I asked this question as an immigrant mom. So you seem to be very comfortable in your Indianness, right, if there is such a word. I don't think this is true for all children, especially I think girls do have this, you know, I'm not like the other girls in my class. Were you always so comfortable, or is this something that happens in high school, college?
Yeah, so I will say, like, middle school is just the worst time in everyone's life, no matter what. But I wasn't always comfortable. I was very embarrassed of my background and my heritage. I didn't want to have people come over to my house. And also it was really hard being able to articulate to my parents what I was experiencing, because they didn't necessarily understand themselves going to school here. And so there was a lot of push and pull conversations. And I think it really wasn't until high school where, like I said, dance was a huge part of my life, and every year our school had a variety show, talent show. And my sister and I decided that we were gonna do a Bollywood dance together. And that was kind of a moment where it was nice that I had someone to be able to do it with, but once we performed it, I was really surprised at how responsive my friends and peers were. They were so curious about the costumes, what it meant. They were very intrigued by it, whereas I always felt that it was a part of me that I needed to hide, and I really didn't. So I think everyone has, again, one of those moments or shifts where you stop caring and you're just going to be yourself. But of course, that comes with time, comes with encouragement. It comes with also seeing more people like them who are out there, and I think that's changing.
Hi, Nina. So some of the work you do is obviously really hard. There are days where you just feel like the challenge is insurmountable, and days where you just don't want to do.
So this is one of my favorite things to do. So this is always like, whenever I'm invited to speak at a college or university, it's an immediate yes, I'm happy to be here. I think what's been difficult afterwards is, again, finding a voice and finding this balance of I suppose being Indian and American. And actually the project I just finished working on was with ZTV, and I'm sure some of you have heard of it. So ZTV actually approached me a year and a half ago, and they really wanted to create new content for our generation, for young South Asian millennials, because essentially at this point, specifically in America, in North America, I should say, because I think at this point they somewhat have a dying market, since I would say the people who really subscribe to it are probably my parents or grandparents' generation. That friend group really doesn't watch CTV. And so they were creating new content and really wanted to rebrand their network, and so they reached out, and we put together, essentially, after many conversations, what was a reality show called Made in America. And from the beginning, I will say, we were very clear that we wanted to create something that was empowering for young women and to be able to showcase their journeys with what they're struggling with. Just because of so many conversations I had had, there's this constant push and pull between our cultures. And so We created a show. It's with 6 young South Asians sort of entering a new space, and we followed their journeys for 10 weeks. So that just finished, wrapping up, I suppose. And the experience was, of course, wonderful, but I think the issue is, again, it leads back to, I think, in terms of my own struggle, is that I do think there's a space in entertainment for our voices to be heard, but no one's really clearly doing it yet. And so to also have to kind of navigate new territory, uncharted territory, yes, it's exciting, but it's also, you get a lot of no's in the industry. I mean, people still, I'll talk to, different networks and producers and agencies, and we're in agreement where we need to create new, meaningful content that we're putting out there for people to connect with, but no one is doing it very well yet. So I think that's been the hardest challenge, is navigating this world and creating something new in this space for all of us that I think we'll connect with. Okay, we have one last question for this one.
You were talking just a little about South Asian representation in media. What are your current opinions of the American-centered South Asian films, or media in general, like Master of None, Big Sick, those kind of?
I mean, I think there's moments in all of them where we're like, oh my goodness, this is so true. And I think for me, yes, there also has to be this entertainment value, and of course there's stereotypes. But the fact that these are happening, I think, is really wonderful. And I think it's only going to continue to grow from here, because we are a very affluent population. We're here, and I think Indian Americans are beginning to use their voices more, South Asians, and we need to be heard. I think in the past, a lot of times, even what I found is my parents' generation, is that you kind of put your head down and you work hard, and that's how it is. And obviously we're defying that as millennials today. And so I think we're going to see a lot of new exciting changes happen. But with that being said, I guess I'm just going to close with one last story that I usually save for my younger audiences, but I'm going to tell you anyway, because also the question you had asked if I was always, proud to be Indian. And when I was in 5th grade, there was a young boy who said, "Oh my goodness, Nina Davuluri has a bigger mustache than my dad." And it was kind of true at the time, but it didn't mean it was any less hurtful. And so what I always say is that every time we are speaking, every time you are having a conversation, we have the opportunity to influence someone. Our words have influence and impact, and we have the choices, each and every one of us, to influence them in a positive or negative way. So just a little food for thought. Take that away with you, that those little conversations do make a difference. Thanks for having me.